I was found guilty of second-degree murder and was sentenced 15 years to life in the California prison system. In prison, I was always fascinated with books on entrepreneurship. It just became like this perfect storm in my head. I got involved with Defy Ventures when I was still incarcerated. A couple years ago, I stepped into the role of executive director for our chapter in Southern California. The purpose is to instill in each person the entrepreneurial mindset.
Quan Huynh in the Get Busy podcast studios in LA, and we are really glad that you're here. You are the executive director at Defy Ventures, and we're going to get into the work that you do. You are also an author of a best-selling book, which is right here, Sparrow and the Razor Wire. And, you know, interviewing you is a little different than interviewing entrepreneurs and startup founders and leadership coaches, because your experience is entirely different. And, you know, let's start with 1999, and you murdered somebody. You were in a gang. So let's start with your, you know, a little bit of background about your story, and then we're going to get into the transformations that you've gone through and the transformations that you are helping other people go through. So let's start. You were in Utah. You experienced a lot of discrimination, you know, and then you moved to Hollywood and got involved in gang activity. So let's talk about that.
Sure, yeah. I grew up in Provo, Utah, first generation Vietnamese refugee. We lost our country, and my father decided to settle in Utah, of all places. My father was in the South Vietnamese military, but had actually come to the U.S. to train with the U.S. forces. So he knew, I guess, the lay of the land of America. And my mother had never seen snow, so my father decided, of all places, to settle in Provo, Utah. So I think I would venture to say we were probably the very first Vietnamese family to live in Utah at the time. Yeah, I did experience what I do now know to be racism. I mean, Utah predominantly was a beautiful place, a bunch of beautiful people, but I did have quite a bit of experience of racism, and I think a lot of that planted the seeds of my own sense of identity later, like what's wrong with me, what's wrong with our family, why don't I fit in? And then my father got diagnosed with leukemia, and that's when we moved out to California, because a lot of his family lived here in California. That's when I first started going to school with other Vietnamese kids, other kids of color, and even the other Vietnamese kids teased me because I couldn't speak English. I mean, I couldn't speak Vietnamese that well. A lot of them couldn't speak English that well, and when they teased me for being whitewashed, I think that also further was, in my mind, evidence that there's something wrong with me and I don't fit in with people, or I'm not accepted. And my father passed away when I was 13. By that time, because he was always in and out of the hospital, my mother was never home. Like by that time, I had already been hanging out with different, I would say, misfits at the time, and which later on became, you know, different groups of guys that later on formed our gang. Yeah, my father passed away when I was 13, and I was first arrested within 4 years after that for my and went to juvenile hall.
And then talk about how you got, you know, you were in juvenile hall, and it's just sort of spiraled after that. Mm-hmm. And you know, in your book and in your, you know, your life and in media, you're very open about, you know, the fact that you murdered somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you go from, you know, being a juvenile delinquent to being a felon?
Yeah. So once I went into juvenile hall, the California juvenile system, prison system, jail system is segregated by race. So I was told this is your group, this is your people, and my group and my people were other, mostly Vietnamese or mostly Asian people that had come, that were involved with the system, were in gangs. And those were the guys I looked up to, and those were the guys I began to emulate, and those were the guys. I remember even in juvenile hall, hanging out, and then later on getting charged as an adult and going to the county jail as an 18-year-old and hanging out with the older guys coming back from the prison system and feeling like, oh, this finally, this is where I belong. Like I found a group that accepts me, and uh, a group that I can identify with, and a group that can relate to my own sense of feeling discriminated and having people against us, and now it's us against them, and just beginning just to embrace a lot of those values that were distorted. But at the time, for me, it was just okay. This is what it was. So once I was released for the first time out of because it was from juvenile hall to the county jail, and I ended up going to the California Youth Authority, which at that time was basically a gladiator school for young adults. And in all the values inside the Criminal Youth Authority was around gangs and identification and earning accolades
What
by
is
doing
the Youth
violence.
Authority? Like, for those of us who are unfamiliar, like, what even is that?
It's a place where they send, let's say, after you've gone to juvenile hall and you're sentenced, it could hold you up to you're 25 years old. So that's where they help. They don't have it. I think they're closing down the last one, or they've already closed down the very
Okay.
last one.
Okay, so they're phasing it out of
They
the
phased it
system.
out here in
Okay.
California, but I mean now they just hold them long term. They still hold them till they're 25, but it's not called a youth authority. There wasn't much training. There weren't many programs in it. It was just a bunch of young adolescent men that are involved with have all these gang values and all these weird distorted beliefs, and there was no programs to really help us think of different ways of just viewing life. So I would have to say, after I got released from the California Youth Authority, I was even more enmeshed in the criminal and gang lifestyle. Uh, a lot of my own friends that I knew before going to juvenile hall, like all my friends from high school, I think when I came out, I felt like I didn't fit in anymore. Like people don't accept me. Like there's this stigma about me, and the only people that I felt comfortable around were my friends that I made when I was incarcerated. So those guys actually became the core part of our gang later. Like we just people knew us. Oh, that's that group, and then that's how it spiraled from there, and then culminating in I think that was like going in and out, like getting violated for gun violations, gang violations. And then I remember getting out in 1998 after a 2-year violation for guns and gangs. And I began working at this job at the Gallup organization. And that year I was recognized as their interviewer of the year, and was asked to do a management position interview. And I think at that time in my mind, I thought, okay, finally something's going to go right in my life, because there was still straddling the fence. It was like, yes, there's all this part of me that wants to be a successful, like in my mom's eyes, a successful man or whatever, whether that's going to school, having a job. And then there's a part of me that felt really enmeshed in the gang, because these are guys that I felt like understand me and my
Right.
life. So it was like a weird dichotomous lifestyle, but I thought for once in my life, things are going to go right by getting this job. And they did an interview. It's a personality-based interview. So when it came back, they said, I think about a month later, one of the managers came in, and I already had these dreams. Oh, I get to be part of the management team. We're going to oversee 300 interviewers. This is going to be great. And she tells me, and this is the exact word she used. She says, Quan, we're sorry, but you are not a fit. And that's just the words they use. But I think hearing that and
Right.
just how it resonated with me and my own identity issues, I didn't deal well with that. I didn't talk to my girlfriend at the time. I didn't tell anybody about it. And I did what I knew best at the time. It was just mask it by going to drink. About a week later, I went to a club up in Hollywood. I brought a gun along. Went with some of my gang associates, and we went up to the club in Hollywood. And when I came out, I found out some of them had gotten in a fight with a different group. So for me, it was like, okay, here's an opportunity to take out all this frustration and anger and whatever else is going on in my life on somebody, and I used the gang as an outlet for it. But it took a lot of years of self-reflection to realize I didn't do it for the gang. It was very self-serving for me, and it was very. But for years, I hid it behind. Oh, it was a gang thing, but if I really think about it, it wasn't a gang thing. It was a me thing. It was
Right.
an anger thing with me. And I think if you asked me back at the time, are you an angry person? I would have said no, hell no, I'm
Yeah.
not angry.
Right.
and yet I was probably the most angry person in the room, but didn't have any clue or idea of it.
So you killed someone.
Yes, I shot and killed a man by the name of Min Nguyen, and tried to and shot and injured 3 other men that were in the car with him.
And you went to jail.
Yes, they tried me for the death penalty, and I was found guilty of second-degree murder and was sentenced 15 years to life in the California prison system, which at the time basically was the same as a death sentence. It didn't matter if you had 5 to life, 100 to life, life without possibility. There had not been one single life-term prisoner paroled in California since 1977. So once I went into prison, for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to die in here, so why do I need to follow the rules? I'm going to live the way I want to live. And so I continued enmeshing myself in the prison and gang culture in prison, and being involved with anything that, whatever I wanted to do. Like, okay, if I want to hustle, if I wanted to get involved with the drug trade, tobacco, whatever. And I just still embraced that for many years.
But then something happened, right? So in the background of, you sort of immersing in this the gang culture in prison, you're a reader. You're a voracious reader. You studied entrepreneurship in the background. And then, like you write about this and you've spoken about this, you said it was sort of like this aha moment in your life where you noticed the dew on the grass, and you started noticing the sparrow and the razor wire, and something started to change for you. And you wrote about, like, the first time you ever felt freedom was actually in prison. And because to me, that is the ultimate pivot a human can make. And you became aware of the mindfulness that you had not lived in your life, and started embracing these very, conceptual things and making them a part of your life and your existence. So, I'm not telling your story very well. And,
You are, but
no, like, I really want to know, like how this happened, right? Like the moment that you saw the dew on the blades of grass, the sparrow in the wire,
sure.
talk about that.
Yeah, I think one thing that always gave me escape throughout all my years, either growing up outside or in prison, even as a little boy, I always loved to read. And yeah, for some reason in prison, I was always fascinated with books on entrepreneurship. I remember my first few years in prison, I used to have a Wall Street Journal subscription where I would just dabble with stocks and think of do all these things. And I have this tendency when I'm reading certain books and I get fascinated by that subject or that their writings, I go to the acknowledgments section or I look in the footnotes and see what other books influence them, and I just go down these weird rabbit trails. So it was around the 10th, 11th year of my prison sentence, and I can't remember how it happened, but through different rabbit holes, I became fascinated about books on the saints.
Yeah.
And in particular, stories about saints that had failed in some way in their lives, but then had gone on to create these amazing legacies and leave these legacies for themselves, and create these orders in the church. Of course, then that led to books on like spirituality, mindfulness, which then led into personal development, and it just became like this perfect storm in my head. And it was just one day on a prison yard, like my head filled with all these teachings and readings, and I asked myself, like, why do I have to view prison as punishment? Why can't this be a place where I can begin to remake myself, like just how these monks did, or how this person that created this order did? Like, they removed themselves from society, or they went into up into the mountains, or whatever they did, or went to a monastery. Like, I saw these same themes, and I was like, why can't I apply that here to me while I'm in prison and remake myself, even if I'm supposed to die? And of course, the answer from the universe comes back that you can, and that is that moment when I remember, like at Solano, we have these hills right there, and I was standing up by the fence, and the sun was barely coming up over those hills, and I could feel the warmth, and I could still see it this day, like in the little blades of grass, I could see the individual drops of dew, and up above me in the razor wires when I heard that sparrow chirp. And I tell everyone, like, the sparrows had probably been chirping my whole prison term, and I never heard it. But that day, I heard it, and I would say that's the day where um, that shift began for me, where I saw, wait, these are just other human beings here incarcerated with me. Many of them much further along. Some of them perhaps not even awakened, but we were all just here on this journey. So once I came to that realization, I think I remember one of the first things I did was, let me check in with a therapist. I need to talk about my father's death because when he passed away, like we or family as a family, we never processed it, we never talked about it. So it was like 20 something odd years later after he passed away is when I began the mourning process and began to grieve his loss, which then, being the consummate bookworm, I became fascinated with the grief and loss process, especially by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And then I noticed all the men around me also unable to mourn their losses, whether that's grieving family members that have passed on, grieving partners that have left them, even I don't want to say simple, but even seemingly innocuous things with being transferred from one prison to another, but there's friendships that are built, and now they're uprooted, and they have to build new friendships, and they have no way of mourning the loss of those friendships. So I saw a lot of pain around me, and I remember putting together a syllabus and submitting it to the prison psychologist, saying, "Hey, like, can we start a grief and loss group? I think I see this need," and the psychologist loved it. We started the prison's first ever grief and loss group, and I think it was there inside the very first time we did the class, because I had already gone to therapy, so I saw the healing it did for me, but I saw the hunger and the healing it did for the men to be able to start to shed tears, and then that made me feel alive. Like, wait, now I feel alive. I'm doing something meaningful. There's so much fulfillment, and that gave me a new thirst for how do I create other groups and how do I get involved with other groups. So then I'm reading books on group psychodynamics and childhood psychology, and like all these things I started exploring within my own self and being involved with a bunch of groups, creating groups. Then I remember coming to this realization, like, here I am in some forgotten corner of the world that nobody knows about. We're all discarded, but I am doing meaningful stuff, and I am alive, and I am absolutely free. Like, I feel absolutely free. I'm not tethered to anything. I am just living my purpose right now, and that's how I lived for I would have to say those next 4 or 5 years. And then when I went to the parole board, I shared, like, this is how I see it. I remember walking into the parole board and sharing with them for the first time, because that was the first time I shared on the record that, you know what, I was the shooter. I did do this shooting, because throughout my trial I said I didn't do it, and that's the jury found me.
And you came clean with other things too, like evidence tampering,
Yeah.
witness tampering. Like, you just put it all out
Yeah.
there, and then what happened?
Yeah, I remember the first time I told my attorney I want to do this, and my attorney like, no, you're
Right.
crazy.
No.
And I go, no, this is how I see it. Like, I'm already sentenced. They can't retry me. I want to come clean, and this is how I feel I want to show up in the world now. And yeah, I think the board members, to see that, I think it made some of them taken aback, and I saw uncomfortable with it, but I also see that they realized, like, I was telling the truth, and I think in it, I got this feel that there's nothing that they could ask me, there was nothing that they could throw at me that I had to hide from, because I'm okay with owning it. Like, yeah, I committed a murder. That does not define me. I am not a murderer. Like, I'm no longer that same person. And in that realization, that's how I started to show up and help other men prepare for the parole board, and helping them just become better versions of themselves. Yeah.
And you got out on parole.
Yes. In 2015, they found me suitable and said that they felt I was no longer, or I can't remember the exact wording, but like, we don't feel like you're currently dangerous. And when I heard those words, like, oh my God, they're letting me go.
And, I want to go back to something you said a second ago. You said, and here we are, all of us discarded, right? That to me is a hard concept to get your head around that there's this population that is largely discarded by society, by the system. The system failed you, early in your life. And so you get out and let's talk about Defy Ventures. You're the executive director for them. And, I really want you to talk about, why you think you can change lives through entrepreneurship, right? Like your story is really powerful and it's really emotional. And, we're grateful that you're able to share it. But I want to talk about taking a group of discarded humans, left alone in the prison system and how that has become your calling, right? Through Defy Ventures. First of all, what is Defy Ventures?
Yeah, Defy Ventures is a national nonprofit. Our mission is to shift mindsets to give people with criminal histories their best shot at a second chance. I got involved with Defy Ventures when I was still incarcerated as a program participant. I remember when they first came and they talked about entrepreneurship, and that was everything in my blood was about that. So, of course, I joined it. I paroled before the pitch competition and stayed involved with them while after release. And then a couple years later, I heard they were expanding down here to Southern California. And at the time, I was working in real estate at my brother's company, and I'd also helped launch our family's restaurant. But I think I missed that part of fulfillment and meaning that I got from doing groups in prison. And here's the opportunity to build something for men and women coming out from incarceration. So I joined first as the program manager to help build our post-release services. And then over the years, my roles and responsibilities have grown. So now, a couple years ago, I stepped into the role of executive director for our chapter in Southern California. So now I get to oversee the entire delivery of our program in Southern California. We run a program in the prisons called the CEO of Your New Life. So it's ownership, it's everything entrepreneurship. But I think there's a lot of, it's career readiness, personal development, entrepreneurship training, which, a lot of the personal development components resonate with me because that's a lot of the work I had to do while incarcerated. And I think our purpose is not to have everybody create a business. The purpose is to instill in each person the entrepreneurial mindset, right? Like to be okay with failure, lessons of grit, resiliency, pivoting, all of that, all the lessons of entrepreneurship is crucial for these men and women incarcerated. I think for several reasons. A lot of them already have these transferable skill sets, but they channeled it into illegal ventures. So with that same mindset, like when we tell them, like, when I walk in and we're talking about our program, like, which one of you guys here know how to hustle? And every single man or woman will raise their hand because in prison, like that's what they are. They're hustlers. And I think they may have chose wrong decisions in their hustling, but the skill set is still there. So I think reminding them of that and then instilling in each of them, yes, society has discarded you, but you have value. Let's first examine your self-limiting beliefs. Let's first examine your fear of failure and then embracing these things because these lessons that you could learn while you're here, and then this could also help to contribute to your actual superpowers. So that's where we get them to come to a place. Does it work?
How do you approach the topics of, let's take this hustle you have and channel it into, a positive outcome this time? Like, how does that, are people receptive?
I think very many of them in the beginning may be skeptical, may not know that they have, but I think a lot of that's where we have, because it's a 2,000-page curriculum.
Yeah. And that's like a dissertation.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's facilitated by a Defy Ventures employee that goes into the prison twice a week to deliver programs for about 5 hours of in-person facilitation, and then homework and deliverables it take about another 5 to 8 hours a week. So it's about a 10 to 13-hour commitment that these men or women are putting themselves to, and this is on top of like whatever prison obligations. Let's say they're a prison job, or if they're in college, or whatever else they have to do. But this is like, it's not an easy curriculum, but I think it's the most fulfilling one. I mean, here's an example. We just graduated a cohort at Tehachapi Prison. We went there. Tehachapi Prison is a level 4, which is the maximum security. The warden said, "Can you please come to this yard? This is my most violent yard." but I've seen your guys' programs, and I've seen our program. I know, like, once we get into a prison yard and we start graduating a couple cohorts, suddenly it changes the fabric of that prison culture, because now the people are crossing different
Yeah.
racial and cultural lines, gang lines, and they're learning, because, like, what do you have to learn about in entrepreneurship? There has to be collaboration, there has to be teamwork, there has to be conflict resolution, right? Like, if you want to be, we tell them, how can you be a CEO if you don't even can't even manage your own emotions, right? You don't know how to manage employees. You have to manage a team. So there's all these things. So we teach them all these lessons. There was a man that I went there. He came up to me and he goes, "I just finished reading your book, and now you're here." And there was our career manager had also done 26 years. So he came in and shared, like, "Hey, this man was like, I don't believe that you're here. I just read your book, and I don't believe you're here." He's talking to our career manager. "You did 26 years. I have a life sentence. Like, I can't speak English that well. Do you think I could go through this program?" So our career manager tells him, "I give you my word that if you go through this program, it will be one of the best decisions of your life while you're incarcerated." And to see the progression of this man over the next 6, 7 months, and the joy every time I came back in, I see him walking differently and showing up differently. And then at the graduation, for him to get up there and say, "What the fight has taught me the most is it brought my dignity back." He's like, "Even if I die in here, now I know how to die with dignity." And I was just seeing his own progression of how we could change one man's life. And then he's telling me after, "Hey, do you think it's possible?" Oh, and on top of that, for him to say that he couldn't speak English, he got 100% on his final, which is unheard of, right? And then for him to come back and say, "Do you think it's possible that I could come back on the next cohort as a peer facilitator?" Because we have, like, graduates come back, and this would be the most meaningful messenger, like most credible messenger to be our thing. And for him to still have those self-doubts, but I'm like, "Yes, please apply." He's like, "Do you really think I could?" And I just saw his face light up, and I can't wait to see the impact that man does on his yard, because, like, he came out of the security housing unit. I think they housed him in solitary for like 20 something years, and now he's out there on that yard, and he's one of our own messengers to start changing the culture inside it. So yeah, I think I get to see our work firsthand on how many. I mean, I have a million stories about our men and women that have come home and the amazing things they're doing out here. In last week, we were at an event in Los Angeles for community-based organizations. There were 10 organizations that were, like, giving their pitches, and 6 of those organizations had Defy graduates in positions of influence or leadership in each of these positions. So we're
Wow.
just out there talking, like, look at the work that we get to do now. Like, when I first came home, there wasn't this, and I got to help, and a few others got to help pave the way. But now we get to see a lot of men and women coming home. There's a big movement to have people with lived experience in these positions of leadership and influence to help inform on decisions that they're making. So yeah, I'm proud to be part of Defy and being a part of an organization, and that we get to make an impact out here, not only in the prisons but out here in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's dignity, but it's also hope, right? And self-respect. And it's so important, especially if it's changing, the culture within a prison.
Yeah.
How do you, like, at Defy, like, what's your measure of success? Is it the number of, entrepreneurs, or is it, how do you, like, what
I
you're
love that
talking
question.
about is not measurable.
It actually is measurable in some ways. So to give you context, historically, California's recidivism numbers, the rates at which someone is returned to incarceration at 3-year mark, is 67%. Okay?
That's really high.
That's really high.
Yeah.
And currently it costs $132,000 a year to incarcerate one human being in the state of California. Okay? A Defy graduate, 3-year mark, less than 15% recidivism rate. So if you contrast that, it costs about $85,000 to do our program in prison. for 50 men, right? If you extrapolate that number out for 132 per year for 50 people, that'd be 6.6 million. So investing 6.6 million at a 67% failure rate, or 85K, and then suddenly there's these men and women that are not only changing the fabric of the prison culture, but I think once they come home, the rates at being returned to prison are much lower. And I think that's a combination not only of our program, the community that we've been able to build, but I think also because it's the flip side of our mission is to not only shift the mindsets of those that are incarcerated, because what good does it do if we run, like I'm biased, I could say we run the best in-prison program out there. But what good does it do if we have the most transformed human being coming out and they're still facing barriers to employment,
Right.
fair chance hiring, housing, fair lending practices, all of that? What good does it do? That's why we intentionally bring people from the business community in with this, because we believe that's the community that could help us achieve systemic change. So once they come into proximity with our program graduates, they get to see, wait, these are just human beings that are just looking for opportunities to make better lives. So once a person has served their time, why are they still facing these certain barriers? So I think that's where we've been able to help change the landscape, not only in prison, but I think out here for people coming back into
That seems like
reentry.
almost the bigger challenge,
Yes.
right? Is the perceptions of, how the world receives an ex-prisoner, And so once someone has gone through the Defy program and they graduate, what happens after that? Is there like a continuing education part of the program, or once you graduate, that's, here's your diploma, off into the wild?
Each graduate is given a certificate of entrepreneurship from Drucker's a Drucker certificate of entrepreneurship from Claremont University's School of Management. So every graduate has an opportunity to come back as a peer facilitator. So they have to actually apply.
So you keep them involved.
Yep.
Okay.
Find the leaders to continue to keep them involved, to help them cultivate future cohorts. Also, we keep in touch with them by sending in regular newsletters. Of all of our graduates in the California prison system receive a letter from us to say, don't forget to contact us when you come home. Here, let's share with you success stories from other graduates at other prisons. Let's share with success stories about those that have come home. So we let them know like they're still part of the community. Once they come home, every graduate is issued a Chromebook. Then we put them through a digital literacy course that we have in partnership with Google, where they learn about Google Calendar, Gmail, business professional in communications. Here's Google Doc. This is how you start to build your resume. So they learn about all of that. Then we have our workshops that can help them financial rebuilding credit after reentry, financial literacy, practical workshops that can help them on their reentry journey. And then we have a case manager who does the intakes, finds what type of passion they have, employment, whether they want to work, what colleges they may be looking for, what certifications. For those that want to build a business, we do have an entrepreneurship pathway where they can go through and begin building, towards their business, and like, okay, how do you get your first sale? How do you get your first customer? Once they've demonstrated that, we have a partnership with LegalZoom that gives them free incorporation. I think I may be off on the numbers, but I'll give a conservative number. I think Defy has helped build 160 businesses. I think the numbers are higher than that, but I'm not. The last I saw was around 160. Yeah.
Why do you think the whole idea of entrepreneurship, why does that work in a prison system? Like why are people receptive to it? Is it empowering? Is it aspirational? Like what's the magic?
It is empowering. It is aspirational, but I think it's also innate. Like a lot of these men and women come from communities of color where they may have already been hustling on the streets. They may have already been selling drugs. Like, we as society could look at that as this is illegal, but yet they already understand. Okay, they might not understand numbers in the way like, okay, well, you're talking to numbers and they break down a financial spreadsheet. They might not know, but you tell a man like, okay, how? Let's say you cut up a pound, like how many grams in an ounce? They'll know how much. How
Right.
much can you make? So
Right.
they already know numbers, but it's just they're not fluent in a different set of numbers. So we get them to understand. Wait, you do understand this. It's just reframing it in a different way. So I think that's where it's powerful for a lot of them when they realize, oh, I see when a light turns on when they're like, oh my God, I already know this. I
Right.
just knew it under something
Something
different.
else. Yeah,
And
there's a
yes,
familiarity
so
to
once
it.
they're able to reframe it and then make the connection, you they just take off.
What is your experience with prisoners and teaching these concepts? What has been the biggest hurdle for you guys at Defy? Like, is it political? Is it like people coming out, or like what resistance have you met? Because everything about it sounds like a step away from discarding, right? Like what are the challenges that you have?
Well, I think if we're talking about logistical challenges, is the space in prisons. In California prisons, there is a slight movement towards rehabilitative programs. So like there's a lot of programs that are being provided. So just finding space and the times to do it. Of course, there's funding. Like where Defy Ventures is part of this coalition of about close to 100 community-based organizations that are doing work inside of prisons. There was this report that just came out from the California Department of Corrections that talks about um, the recidivism rates of those that it was a 3-year study of those that have not done any prison programming. I think it's the numbers I just saw it yesterday. I think it was like 50% will go back to prison within 3 years compared to 20% that have done programming in prison. So that shows prison programs work.
Yeah.
And then now, how do you invest in it? Because there is no line item budget in the California budget for prison budget for rehabilitative programs.
Right.
It's like it's called CDCR for the R's for rehabilitation, but the California's done a terrible job of providing rehabilitative programs. And I think recently we're part of this coalition's work. We call it the 1% campaign, where we're asking for just 1% of the California prison budget, which is actually $14 billion.
Oh.
So 1% is $140 million. To give you context, we just were recipients of this grant called the Rights Grant, and that was 20 million allocated to give to community-based organizations that were doing work in California prisons. So that was split up. So I think we received about close to 300K, like 250, 270K, which is a good deal. But I'm thinking, think if just 1% of the budget, we would have got 7x that. That would have been like 2.1 million that we could have really invested in like other stuff to build out the organization and to build out the effectiveness of our programs, especially for the men and women coming home.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's just budgeting, and there's the embracement of rehabilitative programs. Do they work? And
Yeah.
there's evidence that it is. But I think changing the culture of the prison guards union or the government and the legislators in California to realize, like, wait, if you invest in these people, because what's the point of incarceration? I think that's the question that's got to be asked. Like,
Yeah.
is it to just lock them up and throw away the key? Like, people come home.
Right.
Especially, it costs more to incarcerate one human being for 1 year than a 4-year college education. And then they're going back in. So these are tax-paying dollars that we will still continue to have to pay, and there's no investment into the futures of California
Right.
and or like other states. So yeah, I think that these are questions that sometimes I'm not sure if we're asking the reasons why, or like what is the purpose of incarceration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's kind of come full circle here and talk about you, right? So you've lived these extraordinary experiences, and you're changing lives, and it's important to you, and it comes through in every word that you write in your book. What does your future look like? Like, how are you going to measure your own success?
I love this question. I think for me, after my Sparrow in the Razor Wire moment, it's always every decision I've made since then, I would have to say, has always come from like my gut, intuition, higher power, whatever you want to call it. It's just so whatever opportunities open up and I see this feels right in my gut, then that's where I go. So I'm not sure what's next. I've been asked, like, I don't know. I guess it just matters what the universe has in store for me and what other opportunities are there. And if it feels in alignment with how I want to show up and impact the world, then I'll go with it. If it doesn't, then maybe it's not for me. So
Yeah. What is your advice, sort of as we're wrapping up here, for, someone who is feeling hopeless and, sort of without cannot see the future? How do we as humans recognize our own sparrow in the razor wire moment? How do you know that? How do you get there?
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. But it's so profound in your book, and the way that you have each chapter is, the transitions between the chapters is your parole hearing, basically. And, the way you tell that story, there's an effortlessness to your story. But I think those moments, for people who are, incarcerated metaphorically, just recognizing those moments, the dew on the grass, the sparrow in the razor wire, like not everybody has that ability, and so I don't know if you come up with something like how we can all recognize those moments.
Yeah.
Call me, because I think you could save a lot of pain.
Yeah, I don't know for each. I wouldn't know how to prescribe it for everyone else. I think for me, it would just be like listening to my inner voice, or just following my intuition. But then that it didn't. My intuition and my inner voice were not always there. It had to be cultivated and it had to be nurtured. So it took a lot of work. So that's why it's like I don't know how to. I can't just tell everyone, oh yeah, the simple thing, just listen to your intuition. Yeah,
right.
It's not that. I think it's each person has to find their calling, their voice, or their own connection for the intuition, and see what the universe has.
And you have to want it. You kind of have to manifest these things. And because you had gone through, a series of discoveries about yourself, I think your eyes were, open to these kinds of moments. So I cannot tell you what a joy it is to sit here in the studio and hear your story. It is emotional, it is stirring, it is inspirational, and you're just, you're a really cool human to get to start the day with. So thank you so much for joining us in the busy studio.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, the book, Sparrow and the Razor Wire, bestseller on Amazon. Everybody should read it. Seriously, I think everybody should read the book.